So welcome again to Upcycled Certified Design and Research Behind the Mark. I'm so excited to be hosting along with an incredible team of panelists. My name is Leah Graham, and I'm the marketing director at the Upcycled Food Association. And we're excited to share everything about what went into the design and research behind the mark, which was an incredible amount of work. So just a quick rundown of what's up, what we're going to be talking about today. I'm going to do just a very high level overview of the state of the upcycled movement, how we got here, why we need a certification mark. I'll introduce our incredible panelists who will each walk through the work that they did to develop the mark, and then we'll talk about where we're going and have a Q&A at the end, like I mentioned. So please do type any questions into the Q&A box and we'll address those at the end. So the whole goal of the Upcycled Food Association is to build a better food system, namely a circular economy of food, which millions of consumers can prevent food waste through the products that they buy. According to Project Drawdown, food waste is the #1 solution to climate change. So this is an incredibly important opportunity for everyone. So just a quick timeline: in just 18 months, UFA was founded by 8 companies that were using upcycled foods and ingredients that got together to kind of have a unified vision for the upcycled food economy and define what upcycled food is. They've grown incredibly quickly. We now have 160 mission-driven businesses, and we're certainly moving quickly and across the world, across 20 countries. So one of the first goals was just to define what upcycling was. So they put together an awesome task force of professionals across industry, government, nonprofit, academia, to provide a definition to use in policy research, creating the certification mark, and a lot more. So next step was to create a standard, like what is an upcycled food? How do you calculate that? How do you determine that? So they created another amazing group of professionals, a diverse team across supply chain, to create a standard, to set a robust, incredible framework for certifying upcycled ingredients and products. So that just happened in January. And then we launched a pilot initiative, a beta program in February to roll out this new program and certify products that is being managed by a third-party certification body called Where Food Comes From. And that brings us to where we are now, the certification mark, so that people can understand which food products contain upcycled ingredients and which food products can, help them make an impact on fighting food waste with their purchasing power. So and we know this is important. We know people are listening now. This is the time to do it. More than 95% of us want to do our part to reduce food waste. Like I mentioned, it's the #1 solution to climate change. Retailers, manufacturers, and consumers are all looking for sustainable alternatives. Whole Foods Market, Food Network, and many others have predicted that upcycled foods will be the next big food trend. The top 10, in fact, for Whole Foods is upcycled foods. We revealed the logo last week we're so encouraged by the response got coverage across all medias. CBS this morning did a 7-minute piece on upcycled foods. San Francisco Chronicle had an amazing article, thanks to Renewal Mill and Caroline and her team. And then just across the board, industry publications are following this. So we're really excited to see so many people on board and ready for this movement. So that brings us to our panelists, which I'm excited to introduce. These are just in order of kind of the way the mark was developed and the different work that went into each of the parts. Of course, it all kind of intertwined at some point, but Alicia Hartley is going to kick us off. She's the Upcycled Certification she's from the Upcycled Food Association, our certification manager. Gage Mitchell is the designer behind everything. He founded and is the creative director of Modern Species Design Agency. Hung-Joon Yi, who's now the assistant professor at Clarkston University, and Dr. Sid Butt, who is currently the assistant professor at Penn State Harrisburg, both worked on research while they were at Drexel Food Lab in looking at the mark. And then last but certainly not least, Mattson Gurula from Mattson is a food technologist who did an incredible survey of consumers once they saw the mark. So excited for you to hear everything that went into it. So Alicia, I will toss it over to you.
Thanks, Leah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. This is an exciting time at UFA. Quickly, a little bit about me. Again, my name is Alicia. I'm a certification manager. I was in the food and beverage industry for a number of years and some product development work as well. I have my master's from NYU, and I'm also a certified True Zero Waste advisor. So a little bit of sustainability, a little bit of food waste and food system work in there. Okay, so embarking on this journey has been fun. One of my favorite elements of this project was the actual design process of taking the raw elements and then seeing what finally comes of it at the end. So in the beginning, research played a core part of the logo development process and was used to make the final determination on the design choice. You can go to the next slide. So we first started with initial research that sought to find the right elements for the certification logo. These elements included shapes and fonts, colors, and symbols. At the end of that research, what emerged were plant-like symbols, circles, squares, shades of green and blue. Cursive and sans serif fonts came out on top as the best received elements for a certification logo. At the same time, a portion of the consumer literature review that I was working on at the time also touched on research related to certification logos and aligned with the previous study's findings. This portion of the review discussed research around shapes, colors, and types of messaging that resonated with consumers and which types of elements relayed the clearest message. After this, a logo team was formed. This team consisted of myself, other staff members, and some of our amazing board members. And even within this team, there were brand owners who were able to give real-time insights and inputs as to how the logo would potentially play out on packaging, which was invaluable insight to have during this process. The standards committee didn't have a direct role in the development of the final logos. However, through the standard development process, they did give some guidance as to what the less than PUI logo, AKA the minimal content mark, should generally look like. But I'll speak more on that later in this presentation. And then I think I kick it over to Gage.
All right, hello everyone. As introduced earlier, my name is Gage. I'm the founder and creative director of Modern Species, which is a brand design agency. So we were super excited when we got the opportunity to discuss this project with the Upcycled Food Association for a couple of reasons. Not only do we constantly use certifications on packages and other materials that we design for Better for the World brands, so we know how important those marks are, but also how difficult they can be to use at times. So we're excited to be able to participate in bringing this to life and do it in a way that would be easy for people like us to use and for brands to use. So it was both pure excitement as well as a big responsibility in our eyes, but we were super pumped to be part of it. Next slide. So to get started, of course, with every project, we want to define some goals, and this project was no exception. For a certification mark like this, we discussed with the team what success looks like. And a few of the things that bubbled up to the top of the list for this particular mark was communicating impact was highly important, because not everyone knows what upcycling or upcycled food is yet. So we wanted to make sure that if they knew nothing at all, they knew this was making a positive impact. And if they at least start there, you know, we've got them and they can be motivated to learn more later. And then of course, for those who either don't know what upcycling is or have only heard about it a little bit, we wanted to pique some more curiosity to learn more. So that was one thing that we wanted to aim for. Alongside that, you know, we could say that we want it to seem like a more premium product or safe or other things like that that are obvious. But I think piquing curiosity to learn more was definitely high up on the list. And then for any certification mark, of course, you want to create something that's easily recognizable. Not everyone's going to get the status of the USDA organic mark, which is, I think, one of the most recognizable certification marks out there, because that takes time, and it takes that mark being spread across a ton of different packages and having, you know, government trust behind it. But we wanted to come out of the gates with at least a certain level of recognizability and trust as well. And then, you know, as designers, we wanted to make sure that these are easy to use for designers and for brands. So for companies like Regrained or Barnana or other brands that we used in our process to put this logo on to make sure that the logo worked on package, we wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to compete with any of their other messages, but yet still stand out. So these were a handful of the goals. Like I mentioned, there were other goals, of course, like build trust and so on and so forth. But I wanted to specifically highlight these ones. Next slide. All right, so design exploration. So as many of you might know, there's a whole design journey that goes on behind the scenes. Obviously, we don't have time to discuss the entire process, but what we wanted to discuss was how we went about this strategically to not make something that was just pretty, by which I mean some logos don't have the weight of the world on them and they can just be an interesting looking visual. Some logos actually have to communicate something very specific and have very specific use cases, like being used less than 1/2 of an inch in size on a package. That's a whole different challenge. So we couldn't just make something cool, we had to make something very functional. So first off, what is functional for a certification mark? Things like it needs to be simple enough to be used very small in packages, like I mentioned. At times, this will be used less than 1/2 an inch. It's tiny, so it still needs to be recognizable and legible at those sizes. It needs to work well in black and white, as certification marks often appear, because brands don't necessarily want to use a very big, colorful mark that distracts from everything else on their package. This is going to be one mark alongside a few other marks, most likely. So it needs to be able to work in black and white, as many brands might opt for that choice. But, you know, we also had the strategic decision as a team to make sure that even the color version was subtle enough that people might want to use that. And then, of course, marks need to have a unique and recognizable visual hook. I'll walk through some examples on the next slide in a moment, but the main idea there is that for it to be recognizable, there needs to be some element in the mark that really stands out and is unique from other marks. Because, you know, people don't see the whole mark necessarily all the time. There's a visual cue that will catch them, just like any other brand. So then, of course, these are some criteria specific to the Upcycled Food Association. One was that we needed to stay clear of any imagery or the word or anything related to waste, because so often upcycling gets associated with dumpster diving, and we had no intention of pushing that narrative out further. So we needed to avoid that in every way possible. And then another thing that you might not be as obvious is that we wanted to also avoid anything that looked like recycling, because then people would probably ignore it, thinking it just meant this package is recyclable or something like that. So chasing arrows or arrows in most any form were a little bit confusing to use in some cases. You know, obviously there are ways to do it where the arrow ends up pointing up, but we just wanted to avoid confusion altogether and just make sure that we weren't overlapping with other marks. And then, of course, food imagery needed to be avoided because this mark isn't only going to go on human food products. So we couldn't just make it look delicious and edible, which all these products, or most of the products, probably are. But just to make sure that we're not confusing people on like an upcycled lipstick or something like that, we need to make sure that we don't have a food mark. So next slide. So with that said, some of the landscape that we were playing with, as you all know, some very common marks here. There's a couple different territories to explore. You can use some sort of visual imagery, like the top row, again, chasing circles, a frog, a butterfly, different things like that as your visual hook. Or you can just use initials or words. So the bottom row, paleo didn't attempt to communicate what paleo is. They just put a big P on there, thinking that if you're into paleo, you'll recognize the P and you can, choose that product. So a couple different strategies at play here. We didn't want to limit anything out of the gate, so we explored a pretty wide range of options and exploring different animals, different plants, different initials, different circle forms, square forms, rectangular forms, just a bunch of different studies to try to figure out what would work best. Next slide. What the team found that worked best was this set of marks, which you've all probably seen by now. A few of notes on what we believe made this mark perform best. One example is the large UP, that's larger than the rest of the words, that adds for not only a fun little visual hook of the word up, but it also has a positive association. We're moving things up in their life cycle. We're moving the industry forward. We're helping people buy up, so to speak. So there was a lot of really good associations that we could work with that word. And then, of course, having the leaf in there, which we did explore a lot of different symbols that would go in there, but we found through some of the research, as Alicia mentioned and will be mentioned later too, that the leaf mark, well, kind of ubiquitous on a lot of sustainability symbols, does communicate impact to consumers. And so in order to be as clear as possible, the leaf ended up being the best choice. And then we wanted to make sure that the word certified stood out, so that this does seem like the official mark for upcycled products. So we made sure that the certified and or minimal content words were locked in a nice black box, popped out in white. So it was obviously different and drew your eye. Then, of course, a lot of these certification marks have thin or non-existent borders, and maybe no background color, which can make them difficult to use, difficult to read when they're put over a busy background or a colorful background or a background that doesn't contrast. So with this particular mark, we wanted to make sure there is a white background that we're encouraging people to use wherever possible. And then there is a very thick, very obvious border that won't get deleted the way it often does with the non-GMO logo or other marks where it seems less intentional. And then, of course, we wanted to provide both horizontal and vertical formats to make it easy for brands, depending on what space they have available for their marks. Obviously, we could go on and we could discuss the enjoyable process of figuring out what that minimal content mark would end up being like, because that was a whole complicated process. But for now, I'll leave it there and pass the mic over to the Drexel Food Lab team.
Hi, my name is Hong Jun. I'm currently a PhD candidate at Drexel University, and I will be joining Clarkson University as Assistant Professor of Marketing in the summer. My colleague, Dr. Siddharth Bhatt, and I work on the mark testing for UFA, and we are excited to share our findings with you today. So our approach, in total, we surveyed more than 2,000 consumers, and we started at the fundamental question is, when we look at logos marked, there are a combination of different design elements. Like Alicia mentioned, it could be font style, colors, shapes, and symbol. So we started at the fundamental question is, what do people think of those elements, and what do they associate those elements with? So for example, when we did the association test for all the elements listed there, we asked people how close two things are in their mind. For example, when you think of the word organize, and when you look at an image of a closet, these two things will be fairly close to each other. But if I change the word organized to something like messy, it would be further away. So what we did is we show people different font styles, and then we ask them how close or far away is it from words like sustainability and different types of taste, trustworthy, and also quality, freshness, this type of words. So we test 6 font styles, 6 different color shapes and symbols. And going back to, I see one question here in Q&A from Connor, why the leaf? So what we found in the element testing, association testing, is that when people see plant-like symbols and also dark green especially, they will immediately associate those things with sustainability. So that is one of the reasons why that leaf was included in the final mark. And then after we testing people's mental association for each single element here, we narrow the element down, the preferred element, and with the help from the design team, we then have several marks, several combination of different design elements that we tested further. And what we did there is we put the marks on food package, and we asked for consumers' perception of the food itself. We asked them, what do they think that the taste is gonna be like? What do they think the quality is gonna be like? How do they feel about UFA? How do they feel about the certification? Do they trust it? Those type of questions. And what we found is that, next slide, please. What we found is that the chosen mark compared to the other the other marks is it enhances trust in not just the food, but also the brand and the association in general. And it also strengthens the perceived quality. As long as they see the chosen mark on the food package, they will think the quality of the food will be good. And that is, I think, a very important thing of having a certification mark here. And another thing is that it definitely increases the consumer's willingness to consume, and also their curiosity of finding out more information. And that is also an important aspect that we keep in mind. And lastly, when we list all the marks and ask for consumers' opinion, the majority of the consumers think that the chosen mark translate the best the UFA's mission and also the certification standard. So that is why that is the reason why we chose the mark that we're showing here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Sungjun. So we will pass it over to Mattson.
Hi, I'm Mattson Garola. I'm a food technologist that works with Mattson. And if you're unfamiliar with Mattson, we're a Silicon Valley-based insight, strategy, innovation, and development firm. And we work in the food and beverage industry with clients large and small across all categories and channels, including CPG, food service, and commercial ingredients. And really exciting for UFA involvement is Mattson was the first associate member of UFA, and I had the privilege of sitting on the standards committee to help put together the certification process. And so all of this has been very near and dear to my heart over the last couple months, and we're really excited to share with you our research. So on to the next slide. Mattson conducted a longitudinal study to understand consumers' perceptions of food waste as well as upcycled food. This study was a Gen Pop study conducted with a national panel in the United States. We had just over 500 participants, and it was conducted in February of 2021, which wanted to point out that was before UFA had their great announcement last week. So consumers did not have any knowledge about the certificate and what was happening at this point with the logo. So first, on the next slide, we asked the question of consumers' familiarity with both the food waste prevention movement as well as the term upcycling. And we had great data here that consumers for both 50% were aware of both of these terms. And if you can hit next, Leah. So that again is great, and that there was slightly more familiarity with upcycling than the food waste prevention movement term for our study. And an even bigger importance is that 99% of consumers saw food waste as an issue. There was almost 0% saw it as not being an issue at all, which is really important for the whole movement. And this really ties into our statements that we have here, pointing out this top box that over 90% of consumers think that first, it is important to do their part to reduce food waste. Second, that it's a global issue that needs to be addressed, and that their behavior can directly impact food waste. And this goes down to that orange box for that 43% of consumers aim to buy food and beverage products that use upcycled ingredients. Now, for the next slide, the biggest thing is that while 95% of consumers think that it's important to do their part, there's a disconnect on where they perceive food waste occurring in the industry. So our study found that about 40% think that restaurants and food service are the worst offender of food waste, which compared to Refed's data, it's actually the flip side, that 40% occurs in individual households. So what we can do here is connect the dots with the logo. And on the next slide, really exciting is that once consumers knew about upcycled food and beverage products, 57% were more likely to buy more products in the coming year. And so this is with concepts, but getting into actual logo comparisons. And again, consumers had not seen this. This was launched in February before all the great PR that came out last week surrounding the logo. We had over 50% more likely to buy a product with seeing the certification logo. On the next slide, we asked a question around the mark for impact on taste. And we had over 30% thinking that it will taste better compared to similar products of its kind with the certification logo. And on the next slide, we explored the impact on cost. So there is a perceived cost increase, with over 2/3 seeing the logos that it will cost more than similar non-certified products. But that being said, for the next slide moving forward, we see this as a positive because of all of the association. So it was great hearing earlier in the webinar with Gage and the Drexel team talking about their research, and you can tell with this that the consumers followed exactly what they were talking about. Our top 3 words associated when we surveyed our national panel were environmentally conscious, sustainability, and food waste solution. And I really want to focus on that last key word there, solution, because we also just put food waste as an answer, and that scored significantly lower. So consumers are, with very little context in our survey, getting the association that this is a solution to the food waste problem. If we go down above 30%, 30% also associated it with other extremely positive words: recycled, green, positive, progressive, helps me do my part. And really critically at the bottom, so our lowest scoring words were all negative word attributes that we would not want associated with the logo. So that not for me, low quality, old fashioned. So consumers are already making the connection, even in this pre-fielded study that we did. And on to the next slide, for either the horizontal or vertical logo, we found there to be pretty much a 50-50 split on preference, which is great for logos and brands to put it on pack. And with that, I want to kick it over to Alicia to explain that minimal content logo and how that fits into this.
Thanks, Madison. So why are there two logo versions, right? So this is a result of the standards development process. During the standards development process, we had an open comment period for both members and the public. In order to ensure inclusivity and to honor and respond appropriately to those comments, the standards committee decided to create a special carve out for those products in the upcycled food industry that could never meet the thresholds of the core mark, but they met all the other requirements of the standard. The aim here was to design the less than PUI mark to be clearly distinguishable from the core mark with distinctive design and language elements. The less than PUI's ultimate inclusion in the standard allows for contributions to preventing food waste to be celebrated while establishing a reduced marketing allowance for less than PUIs in a hopes to mitigate, perceived greenwashing. And I think I kick it over to Lee now.
Hi, yes, thank you. Thank you all for sharing the incredible amount of work and thoughtfulness that went into the mark. There's clearly so many things to think about, and it's really encouraging to see the surveys of consumers already recognizing the mark and associating it with positive feelings and intent to buy. So that's so exciting. So what's upcoming is that we're all, I think, trying to grow the upcycled food movement, grow demand for upcycled products by educating consumers about what they are. And then of course, getting this mark on pack so you can actually see it in store. Our dream is to walk into a store and have upcycled shelf sets and, products, a version of an upcycled product versus conventional versus organic. Just giving the people the opportunity to vote with their dollars and make a real impact on fighting food waste. And then our kind of timeline from like UFA and everyone really is just a coordinated effort to, like I just mentioned, simultaneously get on shelf and educate consumers. Open enrollment for certifying products and ingredients is going to begin in June, probably mid-June. I don't want to freak Alicia out, or even late June, but June is what we're on track for. In August, we're hoping to see the mark on packaging and on shelves. And then, ongoing, we recognize there's an incredible amount of consumer education that needs to be done to familiarize people with the mark, what upcycled foods are. We're continuing research, and then membership and just investor growth. So we're really excited about where we're going, and so thrilled all of you could join us today. So with that, we'll have some Q&A. Let me see what's happening over here in the question and answer. And I'll open it up to just any of the panelists that think it's most relevant to you.
Note that some questions have been answered. I think it might be worth reading those off and discussing the answers just in case others had the same question.
Sure. I'll start with, all right, this anonymous attendee. What do you think the mark can do in building the gap between those who say that climate change is an issue and that they want to make a difference, but they don't want to sacrifice convenience or more expensive pricing? Does anyone want to take that?
I could take that answer.
Fantastic. And this is great because we haven't had the opportunity to officially meet the extraordinary Dr. Butt. So if you want to give yourself an introduction as well.
Oh, well, use of wrong words, as my wife would clearly agree. I think she would rather go with the word ordinary rather than extraordinary. But anyways, that's a separate matter. Well, the question about green versus, money has always been both an academic question and a practical question. So we did another paper on upcycled foods and the pricing with upcycled foods. And what we found in that paper is that while consumers do have apprehensions about the prices of upcycled foods, they actually expect the prices to be lower. And we also argued in that paper that it's actually possible in a lot of food categories for the retailers and manufacturers to sell upcycled foods at lower prices than comparable conventional foods, because the sourcing of materials could be worked on, the cost part could be worked on, right? So while we want to do good for the planet, we don't want to, make the financial cost unbearable. That's always going to be a question. But our research shows that with the right set of communication, especially rational kind of advertising around upcycled foods, that price acceptance can be shaped. So the major finding in other research that we have done is that we can really shape the acceptance of prices for upcycled foods by having some sort of right rational communication around that price rather than just putting the price out there on the packaging. So that's an important finding that I wanted to share with the group, which is there will need to be, at least based on our research, there will need to be some sort of crafting of that communication that goes alongside the price to make that price more acceptable.
Yeah, and building on top of that, our survey also asked, separate from upcycled, but the question about paying a premium for brands based on their health, environmental, and human rights priorities. And we found that 50% of consumers were willing to pay that premium. So again, building that consumer education around the benefits of upcycled so that consumers have that positive environmental impact, which we are already seeing from the research shared today, is starting to build that association that perhaps they'll also be paying a higher premium for it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right. The next question is, I understand the use of the leaf part of the logo, but will this be confusing to non-plant upcycled materials? I'm thinking specifically of whey ingredients that I believe will meet the definition. And whey ingredients will be able to meet the definition, so I can answer that part. Any thoughts on the leaf and confusion with non-plant-based foods or ingredients?
Yeah, the researchers might have a little bit more data behind this, but I would say, we definitely went back and forth on what kind of symbol to use: plant, animals, vegetables, like all sorts of different stuff. Obviously, not everything will be leaves and that these products are representing. However, the leaf seemed to represent in general, like sustainability and positive environmental impact. Therefore, that was the best overall choice to stretch across different categories. And so in the terms of whey, for example, while it's not necessarily representing dairy, it will suggest that this product does have environmental impact, which by reducing your food waste will have environmental impact. And I would argue that I believe all the products that this symbol will go on are in the biological sector of the circular economy, not the technical. Therefore, a biological symbol to some degree represents all of those, at least, as best we can. It's impossible to represent everything perfectly.
All right, let me go back to some of the answered questions like you suggested. Here's an easy one. Will the recording be shared? Yes. So we got that. Another question about the leaf, which I think we addressed already. Oh, one person's found it interesting the logo avoids waste and recycling, but how will the everyday buyer know what its meaning is? Gage, do you want to kind of review what you wrote in the response?
Sure, yeah. So as I'm sure everyone knows, a logo or a mark can't do everything for a brand or a movement. So what I was commenting there is that, we had to make prioritize what we wanted this mark to communicate. And based on behavior design principles, starting with education isn't usually the best practice because not everyone's ready to receive that information. But if you can get them curious by making or leaning on things like positive associations like quality and trust in general, and then getting them curious to learn more, then they will seek out the extra information around what upcycling means. So our primary goal, or our higher level goal, was to associate products that have this mark with better quality, more trust in the fact that it has been certified, and so on and so forth. And then once people buy that product and like it, and they're curious to learn more, they'll be motivated to go find that information.
Okay, great. New question that would probably be good for Drexel or Mattson/Madison. Regarding your logo research, was it unaided awareness, or did you have to force a upcycled logo concept before the survey launched?
I can answer first. So the beginning of our survey started with complete unaided awareness, and then right before we showed the specific logo, we gave existing concepts on market, just to familiarize the consumer.
For our research, when we test the elements by elements, we did not mention anything about upcycle. We wanted to see how they associate the different design elements with different words and all that. When we test a variation of the upcycle marks, that we did show a definition of upcycle before we before we show them images of the mark on food package, etc.
Great. Next question is, could this mark be used on restaurant operator menus? Chefs are always looking for ways to differentiate their dishes, connect with their consumers' values, etc. Alicia, I'm gonna toss that to you.
Yeah, I think that might be something to consider later on down the line as the standard gets further developed. But right now it's for products and ingredients and those who have been certified, who have passed certification.
Could it be used, like if they used one of the ingredients in a dish, like could they put that like to the side of the dish or something like that? Or is that still something we need to continue as the standard evolves?
Yes, and I think that'll be a great point of discussion on the standards committee, because I think that will be also a way to also inform consumers and teach them what upcycling products and foods are and where they can encounter them, and that'll expand the user base as well, because if you see something in a restaurant, then that might pose questions, and then it might trigger something in you when you're in the supermarket. You're like, oh, I remember when they used that upcycled flour at the restaurant we went to. Let's see if it's in the supermarket. So there's something to be had there as well, but it'll be a great point of discussion in the next standards committee meeting.
Yeah, great question. I think that is a really exciting piece of it, because that is such a great consumer education thing, and then you can chat about it at the table and make it, that's the goal, right? Just to make this like a household name understanding of what upcycled foods are. So next question. I see that this is important to COGS, cost of goods, and retailers, but what about upstream and downstream businesses like waste haulers? How can they be involved in this?
Again, good question. Well, I think waste haulers have their part in, I guess, some of the documentation, right? Or how they play, their role is within the supply chain. But again, I think, we wanted to focus on products and ingredients. That's not to say that waste haulers don't have a role in upcycling and helping move the industry forward.
would those types of companies be more members than get certification?
Yeah, I can. I'm not the membership manager, but I could see that down the road, because I think one of the great things about food waste is going to take all of us, right, and to solve this and bring our different expertises and parts of the supply chain together to create solutions. So
Great. Here a question came up. Is the mark meant for non-US products as well? If so, did the consumer research study involve participants outside of the country? I see Hungjun responded, the studies were done in the US. I can tell you right now, the certification is for products in the US, but we definitely have the goal to expand to Europe and in all countries really. So that's the ultimate goal. But right now we're focused on US based products.
sold in the US.
Sold in the US. Oh yeah, if you have any other clarifications on that, Alicia, feel free.
Yeah, it's sold in the US. So you could be like, say like you're a Canadian company and you sell products in Canada and the US, you could still qualify, but it would just be for your US products.
There's an open question related to that too that you might just go ahead and dive into as a good segue.
From Barcelona, I'm not sure if this is the right forum. Question, I'm starting a big upcycling project and I'd like to know how we can develop or be included at the UFA in Spain. Maybe I can be referred to someone in Europe that's helping you. Yeah, we can follow up with you on if that's like membership or just making some connections. I know we have, like I mentioned, members across 20 different countries, so I'm sure we can connect you there.
And on the research side, you did have a standards committee member, Francesca, working with Food Stuff in New Zealand that did put out a recent paper around upcycling perceptions in New Zealand. So definitely look that up.
Amazing. Those are the questions. If we didn't get to answer any of your questions, please feel free to email info@upcycledfood.org. We'll be sure to follow up. Panelists, do you have anything else you want to share or celebrate your excitement towards? All right, cool. Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone outside of this panel. An incredible amount of people contributed to where we are today, including members of the Upcycled Food Association, Turner Wyatt, our co-founder and CEO, Ben Gray, co-founder and COO, Rachel Still, our membership manager, Dr. Jonathan Deutsch, who worked with the team at Drexel and is doing incredible things for this movement, and our UFA board of directors. There's like so many people to list, but I just wanted to say thank you to all of them as well. And of course, to the panelists here, thank you for your time, research, and energy around this really important movement. I'm excited to see where it goes. After we hang up here, there's going to be a quick survey that pops up and a follow-up email with a link to this recording. So enjoy and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, team.